My hand was still shaking when I signed it. Not from grief, though grief was there too, sitting on my chest like a stone. It was shaking because I'd just watched my daughter-in-law smile. Not a small smile. Not a polite, sympathetic curve of the mouth you give a grieving widower at a lawyer's office 3 weeks after his wife's funeral. A real smile. The kind you can't fake because it comes from somewhere too honest to lie. I set the pen down slowly, the way I do most things now, and I looked at her over the rim of my reading glasses. "Something funny, Priya?" I asked. She caught herself, rearranged her face. "No, Dad. I'm just glad we're finally getting things settled." I nodded, and I picked the pen back up. But I didn't sign the next page. Not yet. My name is Walter Greer. I'm 68 years old, and for the past 41 years, I've built cabinetry. First with my hands, then with a company, Greer & Sons Fine Woodworking, that now does $4.2 million a year in commercial and custom residential contracts across 3 states. I built that company with my wife, Doreen, standing next to me every single day of it. She kept the books when we couldn't afford a bookkeeper. She answered the phone at midnight when a client threatened to cancel. She believed in me before I believed in myself, and 3 weeks before that meeting, cancer took her from me in 11 months flat. We had 2 children. My son, Marcus, 39, who runs operations for the company now, and my daughter, Renee, 36, who works in Seattle as a pediatric nurse and has never asked me for a dime in her life. Marcus married Priya 9 years ago. Smart woman, MBA, talked fast, dressed sharp, always had an opinion about scaling the business and modernizing our structure. Doreen's estate was worth $3.8 million. The company, the house, 40 years of savings. And 3 weeks after we buried her, we were all sitting in a conference room with our estate attorney, dividing it up. That's when Priya smiled. The meeting was in a downtown office with too much beige carpet and a view of a parking garage. Our attorney, a careful man named Selby, was walking through the trust structure line by line. Priya sat beside Marcus in a blazer that looked like it cost more than my first truck, sipping an iced coffee she'd brought in with her, the straw clicking against her teeth every time she took a sip during the quiet parts. She kept glancing at her phone under the table. When Selby read the line dividing the company's voting shares, 60% to Marcus, 25% held in trust for future grandchildren, 15% to Renee as a non-voting interest, Priya's mouth twitched up at the corner. Just for a second. Then she caught my eyes and smoothed it into something sympathetic. But I'd seen it. And Doreen used to say I had a woodworker's eye. I noticed the grain nobody else is looking at. Later that week, I stopped by the office to drop off some of Doreen's paperwork for the accountant. Marcus's office door was cracked open. I heard Priya's voice, low and quick. "Once your dad steps back from signing authority, we restructure the LLC allocations. He won't even notice until it's already filed." I stood in the hallway holding a manila folder full of my dead wife's tax returns, and I said nothing. I started staying later at the shop, telling everyone my knees didn't let me sleep anyway. I went through the filing cabinet in the back office, the one Doreen and I had always kept the real records in, separate from the digital system Marcus had pushed us to adopt 2 years earlier. I found a filing with the Secretary of State, dated 4 days after Doreen's funeral, amending our LLC's operating agreement. I asked Marcus about it directly, over coffee, keeping my voice as flat and unbothered as I could manage. Saw some paperwork with the state. Changes to the LLC. Marcus didn't even blink. "Dad, it's just a compliance update. Priya's handling the annual filings now. She found some legacy language that was exposing us to unnecessary liability. Standard operating agreement modernization. Nothing that touches ownership." I nodded slowly. "Makes sense. You kids know more about this stuff than I do." I let him see an old man agreeing with things he didn't understand. That night, I drove back to the shop and pulled the actual amendment from the file. It didn't touch liability. It restructured management authority so that any member with reduced day-to-day operational involvement, me, would lose signing power on accounts over $50,000. It was dated to take effect the following month. 2 weeks later, I came in early to catch up on invoicing and found Priya and Marcus in the break room, not knowing I'd parked around back that day because my truck was in the shop. He's going to sign whatever Selby puts in front of him, Priya was saying, laughing into her coffee. Grief makes people compliant. My uncle went through the same thing after my aunt died. Signed away half his 401k because he couldn't focus on numbers for 6 months. Walter's the same. He just wants to feel useful, so let him feel useful. We'll handle the actual decisions. Marcus laughed too. Just don't let him find the Cayman filing before Q3. I stood very still behind the doorway. I hired a forensic accountant that Doreen and I had used once, years before, for an unrelated tax matter. A woman named Eileen Vasquez who didn't know my family and didn't care to. I paid her out of my own personal account, in cash, and asked her to trace any offshore entity tied to Greer & Sons. 3 weeks later, she called me with a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands, funded by $340,000 diverted from a commercial contract that had been billed to a client at one rate and recorded internally at another. The difference had been moving quietly for 14 months, since before Doreen even got sick. I made a decision sitting alone in my truck in that parking garage, the same one visible from Selby's office window. I decided to become smaller. I started using my late father's old wooden cane at the shop, even though my knees were no worse than they'd been in years. I let my voice go soft and searching in meetings, trailing off mid-sentence like I'd lost the thread. I asked Marcus to walk me through spreadsheets I understood perfectly well. I let Priya see me squint at documents and push my glasses up like the print was too small. Inside, I was doing math faster than I had in a decade. The tactic was simple. Grief had already made them careless. If I let them believe it had made me helpless too, they'd stop hiding things from me. People don't lock the door on a man they think can't turn the handle. I started carrying Doreen's old rose gold pin everywhere. The one she used for every contract we ever signed together, the one she was holding, according to the nurse, the last time she reviewed the household budget before the hospital. I told Marcus and Priya it comforted me. That was true. But I also never went anywhere without it, because it had a small, nearly invisible microphone Eileen had helped me source, embedded in the cap. I told Selby, in confidence, that I wanted to hold a final family walkthrough of the estate distribution before signing off. One last dinner at the house, informal, everyone present, before the paperwork went final. I framed it as sentimental. A last supper in Doreen's kitchen before the estate closed. What I actually did was have Eileen finish tracing the Cayman account directly to Priya's personal banking login, time-stamped and notarized, 3 days before the dinner. I had Selby draft an emergency injunction, ready to file the moment I gave him a signal. And I set Doreen's rose gold pen on the table in front of my seat, cap open, recording, the whole night. My phone sat in my lap under the tablecloth, buzzing once every 20 minutes. A check-in text from Eileen confirming the injunction was still ready to file the second I texted back one word. Now. I felt my pulse in my ears the whole drive over. But my hands, when I set the table, did not shake at all. Renee flew in for the dinner. Marcus poured wine. Priya wore the same blazer from the lawyer's office, like an omen. Halfway through the meal, Priya raised her glass. To new beginnings, she said. Now that we can finally run things the way they should be run, efficiently. Marcus laughed. Dad, you should really let the young people handle the spreadsheets from now on. No offense, but you were always more of a craftsman than a numbers guy. None taken, I said. Doreen always did our books better than either of us anyway. Priya smiled, that same smile from the lawyer's office. She really did. Though, between us, some of her methods were a little old-fashioned. We've cleaned a lot up since. Have you? I said. Not a question. I set down my fork. I picked up Doreen's pen. I know about the LLC amendment filed 4 days after my wife's funeral, I said, quiet, even. I know it was designed to strip my signing authority before I'd notice. I know about the shell company in the Cayman Islands, funded with $340,000 skimmed off the Ferris Tower contract over 14 months. And I know, Priya, because I heard you say it myself, that you believed grief would make me compliant enough not to look. The table went silent. Marcus's face went white. You're recording this? Priya said, her voice cracking upward. I am. And so is Eileen Vasquez, the forensic accountant I hired, whose full report is already with my attorney. And, as of the text I sent under this table 4 minutes ago, with the Secretary of State's Fraud Division. I took the amendment document out of my jacket pocket, the one filed 4 days after Doreen's funeral, and I tore it once, cleanly, down the middle, and set the two halves on the table like a period at the end of a sentence. 2 officers from the county fraud unit, whom Selby had quietly arranged to arrive at 8:15, knocked on the door at exactly 8:15. Priya was charged with wire fraud and embezzlement 3 weeks later. The Cayman account was frozen pending trial, and she surrendered her passport as a condition of bail. Marcus, who hadn't diverted funds himself but had signed off on falsified client invoices, lost his operational role at Greer and Sons within the month and was named as a co-defendant in the civil suit Selby filed to recover the $340,000. The marriage did not survive the year. Priya moved into her sister's apartment 2 states away. Marcus moved into the small guest house behind our old property, alone. I sat down personally with every one of our 31 employees and told them their jobs, their pensions, and their contracts were untouched, that whatever happened in our family, Greer and Sons would still pay them on time, every time, the way Doreen always insisted we should. I gave every one of them a small bonus that quarter, out of my own pocket, for showing up steady while the roof was on fire. Renee, who'd wanted none of the business and none of the drama, was named interim operations lead. She didn't want the job. She took it anyway, because I asked her to, and because she was the only one in that family who'd never once smiled at the wrong moment. 6 weeks later, on a night when the rain came down sideways and the power flickered twice in our neighborhood, someone knocked on my door. It was Marcus. No umbrella. No car in the driveway. Renee told me later he'd walked from the bus stop half a mile down the road. He looked 10 years older than the man who'd laughed in that break room. "Dad," he said, voice cracking, "I made a mistake. I know that now. Can I come in? Just to talk. Just for tonight." I stood in the doorway a long moment, the porch light throwing rain shadows across his face, and I thought about the rose gold pin sitting on my nightstand upstairs, and about Doreen, and about the sound of Priya's laugh in that break room. "You're welcome to call me any time, son," I said. "But this house closed its doors the night you let a lie sit at my table. That's not something an apology in the rain undoes." I closed the door, gently, the way I close everything now. Renee was in the kitchen making tea. She didn't ask what happened. She just poured a second cup and slid it across the counter to me. "Mom would have been proud of tonight," she said. "She'd have been prouder if none of it ever had to happen," I said. And we sat there a while, in a house finally, quietly, ours again. Grief doesn't make you weak. It just makes people underestimate what you'll do to protect what someone spent a lifetime building. The people who show you who they are when they think you're not paying attention, believe them the first time. Have you ever had to play weak to catch someone who thought you'd never notice? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. If this story hit home, hit like, subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one.